Hello, everybody. I hope you're all doing well and staying safe out there. I want to talk today about conclusion paragraphs. So, conclusion paragraphs are always one of the things that students hate the most about writing essays. I think there's a very good reason for that, along with introductions, right? Those are always also hard. Make sure you've watched the video on that if you haven't done so yet. But I want to talk a little bit about conclusions today. So the reason I think that most students will tell me that conclusions are their least favorite part of writing an essay is because what teachers have told us to do in a conclusion makes no sense and is kind of just really dumb. So if you're like me, most of my teachers told me, in your conclusion, summarize your argument. Summarize all of your main points and the reasons for your argument. In high school when we used to do those three-part thesis, right? You used to have a three-part thesis. You're supposed to reference each of those, right? One sentence about each of them. So as part of the theme in this course of kind of breaking out of some of those rules and molds and boundaries that other writing classes, and particularly high school, set up for us, um, I think the same is going to be true for conclusions, right? So here's what I would say. I think that it makes no sense that a conclusion should just be summarizing your argument. It's like, didn't you just read my paper? The paper's not that long, right? We're only writing maybe 3 or 4 page papers for this class. So if you're a reader and you don't know what the argument was, and you need me to tell you it again at the conclusion, it's like you just weren't paying attention, you know? Uh, so I think that's where our frustration comes from. Because like, why am I doing this, right? Why should I summarize everything I just said? Just go back and read it if you don't remember. So I think this is the correct way to feel about this, and I think you all maybe have more of an intuition for good writing than you thought that you had when they told you to do a conclusion this way, and you were like, "That's fucking stupid," right? I think that was good writing instinct, you knowing that there's no reason to do that. So what do we do instead, right? What I think the better way to approach conclusions is, because okay, so first of all, yes, you do want to like reinforce your main argument, right? But that doesn't mean summarizing the whole essay that you just wrote. What that means is, yeah, saying what was your main argument, maybe having one sentence about it, but also doing some other things. What are those other things? Number one, you want to use the conclusion to kind of tell the audience why all of this matters, right? You want to give them a sense of the bigger picture of this argument. The way I think about it is that a conclusion is kind of the last moments that you have with your audience. So now that they've read through your whole argument, right? Because you're not really going to be introducing any new information in a conclusion, right? You shouldn't be bringing up new points. That much of what they told us, I think, is kind of correct. But what you do want to do is everything that you said, the argument that you've made, why does it matter? Why should we care? I think this is a really important question that a lot of writing classes really don't address. Because again, I think it's a problem with audience because if students think that they're only writing for a teacher, then they never have to answer the question why the reader should care. Why? Because it's the reader's job to care. They're the teacher. So I think this is another case where it's important to think about your audience as larger than just me, right? Like I've said before, I want you to think about your peers as your audience. I want you to think about your classmates, your friends, people who are of your age, people who go to UCC, things like that. Um, and think about what would be the best way to convince them. Because then, if we're thinking about a more general audience, we do have to give them a reason that they should care about what we're saying, right? As a reader, you want to know why you should invest your time in this essay. Like, why was it important? Why did it matter? Quite frankly, why should I give a fuck, right? So I would try to answer this question in the conclusion. I would make this really the central question of the conclusion. Another way to think about it is, so what? What you want to answer with your conclusion is, so what? The readers want to know this. A lot of readers don't want to come out and ask it. Maybe teachers never really ask this. But this is what a reader wants to know. They want to know why what you've just told them is important. So by the time a reader gets to your conclusion, they've been through your whole argument, right? Okay, here's one reason, here's some evidence, here's a statistic, I'm thinking of general essays here, right? Not only our narrative essay. Here's a statistic, here's whatever, a quote from something. And then when they get to the end of your argument, it's like, okay, so I've given you all my reasons, I've made my argument, here's why it matters. Because the audience is thinking, I see what you said, why is it important if I agree with you or not? So that's what I would try to give the audience with your conclusion paragraph. A bigger picture, kind of emphasizing a takeaway that lets them know, like, you didn't waste your time reading this essay. Here's how this essay, the idea I'm talking about here, my argument, here's how it could impact your life. Here's why it's important for you to think about it, as you go forward, as you think about the world. So a really quick story, just about this idea of so what. So this goes back to when I was in college. I had this professor. I took a couple of film classes. This film professor, and while I was there, and this guy was like a total kind of whack job, right? Like he was cool and he had some really interesting stuff, but his ideas were very out there, very kind of theoretical, very abstract. A lot of stuff about Freud. And these things. He was kind of crazy. Some of the questions that he asked, I've never felt more like I was on mushrooms in the middle of a class than some of the questions this guy would ask, and I'd be like, and I wouldn't even know how to respond. Oh, so kind of a wacky guy, right? So he wrote a book while I was at the college at St. John's, and it's a big deal for a professor, right, to write your first book. It's kind of what every professor is working towards. And he wrote this wacky, this crazy book about it was about death in the movies and about like ways that we depict death in movies. One of the things that he wrote about, I remember, was that he was really interested in viewing the EKG display in hospitals, that thing that goes like boop, boop, boop. He was really interested in viewing that thing as like a cinematic technology, right? It was like a screen trying to represent death. That's the kind of like, shit that this guy was into. So he wrote this book, and he did like an interview with someone else from the department where they interviewed him about his book, and it was like an open event, and there was food and coffee and stuff. So I went to it, just to see what it was about, because I like this professor. And so the guy from the English department is interviewing him, right? He's asking him, what was your inspiration for this book? What's your main argument? What are some of the biggest movies that you talk about in this book? And he's answering the questions, explaining his ideas and everything like that, right? All this stuff, death in the movies and everything, different ways it's depicted. So this goes on for, like almost an hour or something. And then once he's done, everybody claps, right? And then he takes questions from the audience. So a couple questions are asked, whatever. And then they call this other English professor, asks a question. And this woman, she was just kind of hard ass. Difficult class. She docked my grade for, handing something in a couple hours late one time. So this other professor, she asked him a question, the guy who wrote the book, she asked him a question, she goes, okay, I see what you're saying about death in the movies and how, people are trying to find different ways to show death on the screen. But so what? And that's the question that she asked. And the guy, he's kind of like offended. He's like, well, I think there's a number of takeaways here. I think this is really important and it affects this and all these things, right? Where he's trying to basically like justify his book. But it's such a key question that she asked, so what? And then after it was over, people were getting cookies and things, and I was walking around talking to someone, and I heard other professors say to each other, oh my God, I can't believe that she would ask him that. How could you ask somebody that? But it always stuck out to me as being a really important question for any essay that you're writing. So what? So I think that story just illustrates it, and it's maybe something no one's ever said to you before, maybe out of niceness, maybe because they just assumed you're writing for a teacher. But it's something that we have to be thinking about, and I think it is the question to think about when you're writing a conclusion. And if you answer that question, I think you'll feel like it kind of rounds out your essay in a nice way, right? Because I've made this argument, and now here's why all of this matters, reader. As you leave my essay and go out into the world, here's what I really want you to take with you, and here's what I want you to keep thinking about. So that is the main way that I think about conclusions. One other way that I think is good to think about them is kind of telling people what to do now. And it depends on your topic, right? I'm speaking very generally about any essay that you're writing. It depends what your topic is. But for some topics, like, for instance, I've had essays where students write about, the need for better environmental policies and stuff, decrease pollution, those things. So an essay like that, it kind of makes sense to use the last paragraph to tell people, like, okay, here's what you can do now. Here are what the next steps are. Here's how we can actually improve this. So that's kind of another way to think about it. That one only applicable in certain situations. I don't do that as much. More so, the so what thing. Tell the reader why it's important. So I think this is a lot different from maybe how we've thought about conclusions before, and I hope that's a good thing for you. And I think this is really going to help out. So try to do that in this essay. You know, in your narrative essay, you're making an argument about why language is important, right? You're trying to show the reader why language is important. So, in your last paragraph, try to tell them, like, why should they care? Okay, maybe language is important, but why does it matter? How does it change things? How might it change the way people view the world? And ultimately, just why should the reader care that language is important for this essay, but in general. That's the approach that I would have for it. So what? Answer that question in your conclusion. I think they're going to turn out better. All right. Thanks. See you.